To be with you, I'm Katie Tur. There are now just 22 days left until November 5th. And if you're looking for a poll to tell you what's going to happen, I've got some hard news for you. Over the past 3 months, since VP Kamala Harris took over the Democratic ticket from President Joe Biden, the polls have been remarkably consistent through assassination attempts and debates, escalating violence in the Middle East, and interest rate cuts, hurricanes, and legal filings. All the polls, both nationally and in swing states, say pretty much the same thing. The race is tight and almost always within the margin of error. In other words, no one can say for sure which way this election is going. So what can you focus on? What can help you understand the momentum? For one, there's the demographics. We've got reporting on that. For another, the movement, specifically where the candidates are and who they are talking to. Joining us now to figure this out, NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitali, who's here with me in studio, NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor in Erie, Pennsylvania, covering VP Harris, where she is, and NBC News correspondent Garrett Haake covering the Trump campaign. Steve, I will begin with you. I gave that description of what the polls can and can't tell us there in the beginning because they've been so consistent. I know we have another new round of polling. When you're looking at all these numbers, what are you looking for?
Well, good thing we have a brand new NBC poll to add to the mix. That's what you're looking at right here. All tied up, Trump and Harris, though. What we find in our poll is a little movement from a month ago. So we took a poll a month ago and Harris was 5 points ahead. Now a tie. The context for that poll a month ago when Harris led, it was directly following the Harris-Trump debate. Maybe there was an effect from that. Since then, there's been the VP debate. Harris has done some interviews, other interceding and intervening events. So you got a tie right now. I think underneath this, the biggest movement that we've seen, actually, I should show you first, the gender gap here is undergirding this. Look, among men, it's a landslide. Trump is leading by 16 points, and among women, it is also a landslide. Harris is leading by 14 points. You add those two together, and you get what would be the biggest gender gap in history here, 30 points, 24 the previous high, if that holds on Election Day. Again, just the two genders in totally different directions here politically. Now, I mentioned what had changed since our last poll most significantly. A lot of numbers on the screen. Start on the left side. This is the basic perception of each candidate. Is it positive? Is it negative? Right now, look, Trump and Harris, it's the same positive score. That's a low score for each one of them. The negative scores are almost identical. This was not the case a month ago. This is what it looked like a month ago. Look, Trump was 13 points underwater, but Harris a month ago in our poll had a higher positive score, 48%, than negative score, 45%. We were saying a month ago that Harris had created an advantage on likability, on image, on perception. In our new poll, that advantage is gone for her. There is also this. There's the weight of running for Harris as the VP in an unpopular administration. Joe Biden's approval rating in our poll, 43%. It's been in that territory for some time. It's one of the reasons some Democrats didn't want Biden to be their candidate this year. But what's interesting, too, is we also asked in this poll about Donald Trump as president. Do you approve of the job that he did do as president? Retrospective approval rating. And Trump clocks in at a 48% approval rating there. Notable because it's higher than Biden's number, but also that is a higher approval rating than Trump ever got in an NBC poll when he was president. So there has been sort of retrospectively a little bit more of a brightening, a little bit of the public mood towards Trump's presidency than when he was actually president. And it's likely redounding to his benefit now. Another way of looking at this, we asked the Biden administration policies. Are they helping or hurting your family? Only a quarter of voters say they are helping their family. Again, we ask it retrospectively. Did Trump's policies help or hurt your family? And again, look at that difference. Almost 20 points higher. A plurality saying Trump's policies did help their family instead of hurting them. So again, retrospectively there, Trump may be getting some benefit. Now, we also asked top issue. We asked this question differently than we typically do. We asked a very specific question trying to get to motivation around issues. We said, is there one issue that's so important to you that it could be the sole basis of your vote in this election? Asking it that way, abortion came back the most mentioned issue. More than 1 in 5 voters said it's that important that it may be the sole issue that decides their vote. Immigration and the border clocking in number 2 there. How do the candidates stack up on this? Well, on abortion, you see it right here. Harris over Trump by a 19-point margin. When you say, which candidate would be better on the issue of abortion, this is Harris's biggest order, 25-point advantage over Harris. And again, we're saying what changed from a month ago to move this into a tie in our poll? Trump's advantage on this issue has ticked up a few points from where it was a month ago.
All right, so I said demographics and movements, like where the candidates are. I think I should have also added policy to that, given the way we're asking that question and how abortion factors in. Really interesting stuff. Thank you very much, Steve Kornacki. Sahil, you are in Erie, Pennsylvania. That's telling us that Pennsylvania is obviously very important. Who is Kamala Harris talking to out there?
Hey, Katie. Well, in this bellwether county, it's going to be crucial for Kamala Harris to try to win it, given that the winner of the last 4 presidential elections has carried Pennsylvania by winning this county. It swung from Trump to Biden. Now, one demographic that Kamala Harris is trying to speak a little bit more directly and specifically to lately is black men. There's a real concern within her campaign that she needs to boost those numbers. Former President Obama highlighted this in very stark terms a few days ago, and it's since taken on a life of its own. It's a perennial worry because this is a demographic, black voters, that Democrats have to not just win, but absolutely crush it with to have a chance at winning the presidential election overall. And to counter that, to try to make inroads there, Kamala Harris just today released what she calls an opportunity agenda for black men. What it includes is $1 million for fully forgivable loans for black entrepreneurs and others starting a business, funding for education and training programs, protecting cryptocurrency, a national health initiative to address sickle cell and other conditions that disproportionately affect this community, and legalizing recreational marijuana to propel the industry. Of course, what she's trying to prevent is Donald Trump making even modest gains within black voters, and his best shot at that seems to be younger black men who don't have the same affinity to the Democratic Party that their elders have.
Let me play a little bit from Kamala Harris on the black vote talking to the Shade Room.
Let's be clear that your underlying premise is not an assumption that I'm supposed to have black men in my back pocket in terms of their vote, and that I should be taking that for granted, because I don't. Black men are no different from anybody else. They expect that you have to earn their vote. And that's why I'm out here doing the work that I'm doing about talking with folks, listening with folks, because I'm running for president of the United States. And it is incumbent on me to earn the support.
Don't take anything for granted is what she's saying right there. Sahil Kapoor, thank you very much. All right, Garrett Haake, Donald Trump will be in Pennsylvania as well today. Who is his campaign talking to? Who is he talking to?
Well, today they're going to try to talk to suburban voters, a group that they've, somewhat ignored over the course of this race thus far. It's interesting to watch him this week appearing in a suburban county just outside of Philadelphia, having a town hall with a female-focused audience and a female moderator on Fox News, essentially trying to shore up groups where they have seen weaknesses over the length of this campaign, and people who haven't necessarily been core parts of his coalition. But just like Kamala Harris can't afford to, she's going to win black men, but she's got to win it big. She can't afford a big loss there, a big slippage. They kind of feel a similar way about women and suburban voters. They know that the Trump campaign knows they're not going to win in those groups, but they can't just get blown out. They can't have a slippage here. And so I think you're seeing a little bit of shoring up in those groups this week as we turn the corner to the final proverbial stretch of this campaign.
When you're talking about them shoring up those different demographics, I'm wondering, how are they doing that exactly? Is it just Donald Trump speaking to these voters? Is it just Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric? Or is there a ground game out there from the Trump campaign?
No, look, it's almost entirely rhetorical. I mean, some of this is policy focused. Some of it is, kind of some of these specific things that he's tried to roll out over the course of the campaign, policy promises that might affect particular groups. But in terms of the ground game, the Trump campaign is basically running a nationwide experiment on doing something completely unusual here. They have farmed out much of their ground game to outside groups, to outside PACs, organizations like Turning Point, or to groups funded by Elon Musk to essentially do a lot of their voter contact on their behalf. Now, not all of it. They have a pretty robust program of, caucus captains or county captains, they call them now, Trump captains, who can do some of this outreach, but they are not having the same kind of granular, campaign and volunteer-focused voter contacts that campaigns traditionally do. This is something more like what Ron DeSantis was doing in the primary. So when it's all said and done, Katie, either they're going to have shown a new model here of something really smart and a good way to use outside money, or they're going to show that it didn't work and that the good old-fashioned techniques like those used by the Harris campaign are still tried and true. We're not going to know until the votes are counted.
All right, Garrett, thank you very much. Ali Vitale, talking about ground game with Trump feels like 2016, 2015 all over again. They didn't have much of a ground game back then. They still managed to win. Yeah. So much of what we're seeing right now feels familiar and feels like we've talked about it before, but one of the things that is unfamiliar, or at least more extreme, is the gender gap. And we saw Steve talking about it there a moment ago. It could be a 30-point gender gap, which is huge, huge numbers. You've been focusing on white women. What are they? Why are they moving to Kamala Harris in such large numbers?
Why are they moving to Kamala Harris, and why might they still move back to Trump? And the reason I say back to Trump is because typically you look at a gender gap and you say, all right, Democrats win on women, men tend to vote a little bit more conservative. That's what drives the gender gap. But if you go a layer deeper and you look at the way that white women have voted historically, Republicans have won white women by a majority over the course of the last several decades of campaigns. When I traveled to Erie County, Pennsylvania, and it's lucky given the fact that it's so central, it's where Sawhill is right now, it's a bellwether, but it's also a place where if Trump is going to win and keep these voters, he has to. I met voters who voted for him in the past, and the issues that they bring up are why they're not voting for him now. Listen to what they told me.
I changed my voter registration the day after the Dobbs decision.
From what to what?
From Republican to independent. I thought it would be hypocritical if I did not vote for Trump.
When you think about voting in this election cycle, do you have a sense of who you're going to vote for?
Absolutely. I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris.
Why?
4 years ago, I might have said no, but now I do think she is more moderate, and I absolutely cannot vote for Trump.
His message about wanting to break away from the status quo of politicking was appealing.
I voted for Trump. It was a struggle for me, and I ended up voting for Trump, and I regret it.
Is this a permanent realignment for you?
Maybe with my registration, but not with my voting. The voting is always based upon the person, the character, and the issue.
So there's some interesting trends that are happening all layered on top of each other here, right? All three of those women had voted for Trump at some point in the past, and now they say they're going to vote for Kamala Harris for a myriad number of reasons. On the other hand, if you look deeper in the NBC poll that we released over the weekend, we saw Trump go from being -6 with white women voters to Kamala Harris to now being up +2 within the margin of error there, but he's coming back to where he was in 2020.
Let me ask you about some reporting you were doing over the weekend that you haven't put to air yet, but we can talk about just the general feeling that you were getting in Westchester and other parts of New York among the House races. Yeah. Is there anything in the conversations you were having with voters out there that indicates to you this sentiment, the larger sentiment of this election?
I think certainly if you look in swing counties like this one, and the reason we're in New York, although it's not a battleground from a presidential level, is that's where the House was won and lost for Democrats and, of course, won by Republicans in 2022. As I was in these swingier districts along the Hudson Valley, one of them is where I grew up, my hometown, it's an area that has undergone changes from the perspective of maybe they look at the state of New York and they like that it's blue, they like that abortion doesn't feel like it's an active issue here. They were motivated by immigration and crime. I don't get the sense that those issues are as salient as they were in 2022. At the same time, is abortion the X factor? I would generally say yes, especially in states outside of New York. But this is the other layer under the presidential, right? Is the fact that the House is completely up for grabs. It's been divided, and all it takes is flipping 4 seats for Democrats to take control. That's nothing to say of a Senate map that was always going to be tough for Democrats, but now actually might not look as bleak as some people thought that it might have. All of these are shifting dynamics.
I think
and
we
it's a
need
game
to go
of
back
inches.
to what I said at the top, is nobody really knows what's going to happen.
And the magic of election night.
Yeah, this is what's so interesting about this election, that the polls aren't very clear. The interviews you're doing with voters are kind of all over the place. Yeah. It's just a really difficult election to predict. Of course, everyone predicted it one way in 2016 and
we
got
remember.
It wrong. Ali Vitale, really good to see you. Thanks for coming in for us. And still ahead, threat from within, why Donald Trump now says he wants to use the military to handle and what intentions his former security and military officials say they saw up close. Plus, what's that abortion measure in Arizona doing for the presidential election? We were just talking about it with Ali Vitale. We can see how it's playing on the ground out there. And threats to FEMA workers are slowing down the recovery effort in North Carolina. What the National Guard is investigating as local police make an arrest. We are back in 90 seconds. God help us. Joining us now, former New York Congressman and senior advisor for the Political Action Committee Vote Vets, Max Rose. He served as an Army infantry officer in Afghanistan and received a Bronze Star and Purple Heart for his service. Max, Congressman, I'm happy to have you, but I don't want to talk to you about political leanings here. I want to talk to you about your experience in the Army. When Donald Trump says this sort of stuff, he wants to use the Army. There were certainly concerns about that while he was in office from his security officials, from his military officials. They worried about what he thought he could do. They now say, and I've had conversations with a lot of these folks, that they're worried about who he might install and whether those people might do what the former officials did, which was act as a wall against Donald Trump's more baser instincts. If he were to install people that were more sympathetic to him, would he have the support of the rank and file to do things like have the military go after Americans?
You know, the thing about being in the military that's really special to the United States of America and special to the institution is that you swear an oath not to your leader, in fact, not just to the country, but rather to a document, to a set of principles, to the Constitution. And it is your responsibility to protect the nation against enemies to those principles, both foreign and domestic. You know, Donald Trump has not changed over the last decade, but one of the defining factors of his first presidency were such leaders as Esper, Milley, Kelly, who remembered that oath and bore allegiance to it and stood up to Donald Trump. Now Donald Trump has said that he will not appoint people who will have courage and who will have discipline. But I actually still retain great confidence in the men and women of the United States military, that they'll remember their oath to the Constitution and that they actually have an obligation to reject orders from whether it's the President of the United States or their superiors. But man, the stakes of this election could not be higher when you have a leading candidate saying that he will, for all intents and purposes, attempt to wage war on his fellow citizens. It's as scary as it gets.
So where does your worry lie, you know, on a scale from 1 to 10, as somebody who's had the experience of being in the military and somebody who's had the experience of being in Congress and somebody who, you know, has seen Donald Trump, watched him for the past 9 years? Where, you know, if you're going to rank your worry, where is it on a scale?
I mean, it could be higher. It could be higher. Donald Trump is a threat to all that we hold dear. But I don't want you to confuse that intense worry with any absence of confidence in our men and women in uniform, who, by the way, right now and for literally every day of my entire lifetime have been putting their lives in harm's way in defense of all that we hold dear. It is such a shame, though, that part of that sacrifice, part of that fight may very well be standing up to a leader here at home. It is, again, why this election is so significant, because Donald Trump, it wasn't like he didn't try last time around. And at times even potentially successful. Look at what he did with the Muslim ban, for instance. Look at what he did at Lafayette Square, where literally virtually gassed our own citizens, our fellow citizens. He, time and again, tried to push the limits in a truly fascist manner of what the presidency is meant to be. And so many times it was the brave, silent acts of individuals, generals as well below, to prevent him from doing that. This time around, one thing we have to give him and his colleagues, they will be less incompetent at trying to exercise their power. And that's why it makes the stakes of this election even higher.
I know there.
What is it? Just 20 or so days left to stand up to truly what is a living fascist.
You know, there have been former military officials, security officials who have come out on the record. They've voiced their support either individually or they're worried about Donald Trump either individually or together in the form of a letter. They've spoken to reporters. I've had really detailed conversations with a lot of these high-level folks about their concerns, saying that they don't believe Donald Trump has any guardrails. They don't believe that Donald Trump believes in the Constitution. There's not a moral center there that would keep him from trying to use the military if he could. There are voters, though, who hear him say that, and they don't really take it seriously. They don't think he would follow through on that. They think that people who say that they're worried about Donald Trump are just being, you know, alarmist, or they're just partisan. Sure. You know, you come from Staten Island. Why don't voters believe it when Donald Trump says these things?
Well, certainly, I think that people acknowledge that he is a threat to many of the pillars that we hold dear. It's one of the reasons why I bring up things like Lafayette Square, and I bring up things like the Muslim ban, which with time and all the issues and craziness of modern day politics, we can so easily forget. But I do think there's an issue that people are not focusing on, which is, you know, generals and military leaders are by their very nature apolitical. They spent their entire professional lives in an institution that said, irrespective of the political affiliation of their leader, you answer to the commander-in-chief. It takes a threat as grave as Donald Trump and his movement for these individuals to actually stand up and express what is a political belief, that Donald Trump is not suited to be president of the United States, not suited to be anywhere near the Oval Office. They don't take that decision lightly or easily. It is almost against military culture. But every single leader with significant responsibility who has come anywhere near Donald Trump, whether the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and on downwards, has said that this individual, Donald Trump, is extraordinarily dangerous, that you cannot take these words lightly. And I think we should not just take Donald Trump's words seriously, but also their warnings.
And when I say voters, I mean some voters, not all voters. Max Rose, Congressman from Staten Island, former. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much.
And coming up, 22 days out from the election. Again, 22 days out. What an abortion measure is doing to convince voters in that great independent state of Arizona. First, though, a man is arrested for making a possible threat to FEMA workers in North Carolina. How absolutely crazy disinformation is slowing down recovery work out there. North Carolina. Over the weekend, the Washington Post first reported an email from a Forest Service official to a federal emergency responders warning them to stand down and evacuate after National Guard troops, quote, had come across 2 trucks of armed militia saying they were out hunting FEMA. NBC News has confirmed, the existence of the email, but the National Guard says they are still investigating the actual allegations. On the ground in Rutherford County, though, local police have made one arrest, a man armed with an assault rifle who had commented on possibly harming FEMA workers. He's since been released on bail. Joining us now, NBC News senior investigative reporter Laura Strickler. Help us make sense of this story. What's going on?
Sure. So thanks, Katie. We spoke to numerous state officials who told us they've found no evidence of these truckloads of armed people hunting for FEMA workers, which is the good news. But they did confirm that this man on Saturday was overheard at a store in western North Carolina, allegedly saying threatening things about FEMA workers. A soldier in the area reported that to a local sheriff. And then later in the day, a second person called in a report about the same man with more details, including his license plate. So the sheriff's office in Rutherford County went out and arrested him, and he was charged and released after making bail on Saturday night.
All right, so this is all stemming, though, from this concern about disinformation that's out there. I know one of the local congressmen had to put out a statement to folks saying that no, federal officials are not trying to take lithium deposits from a location in North Carolina that had been seriously damaged. It seems like what's the biggest problem here is just folks that are online spreading incorrect stuff.
That's right. And I mean, in this situation, the good news is that 2 people here reported this alleged menacing behavior. And while FEMA says they had to make some operational adjustments, they returned to work the same day. And they're eager to help the people of Western North Carolina recover from this storm. And they've really gone out of their way to reiterate that misinformation, like you described, has made some people less likely to apply for FEMA support. So they're strongly encouraging people to apply online as soon as possible.
All right, don't believe everything you read online. That's the lesson there, Laura Strickler. Thank you very much. And still ahead, the airspace above a military base was breached by a fleet of mysterious drones. What the Pentagon is saying about that incident. First, though, what voters in independent-leaning Arizona are telling NBC News about what abortion on the ballot is going to mean for their presidential vote. Don't go anywhere. Are being asked to set their own state's legal limits or to enshrine the right to abortion in the state's constitution. That does include Arizona, where Democrats hope the ballot issue will help the party in both the open Senate race and the presidential race. Joining us now from Phoenix is NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz. So Liz, what are voters telling you?
Hey, Katie. Yeah, well, no surprise. A lot of young voters and women voters of all ages are telling us that this issue of reproductive rights is their #1 issue and a motivating issue for them. And a lot of folks we've talked to here have said this is the first time that they've even gotten involved in a campaign to go out and support this measure. In fact, we're inside the headquarters for the group that's supporting Prop 139. This is the abortion access measure that would expand abortion access here in the state of Arizona and also enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution. They have been out here for months, canvassing, getting out the vote in this final stretch now. And they say they hope to knock on 1 million doors by Election Day. We've been talking to folks who support this measure and also those against it over the past few days. Take a listen.
And it's nonpartisan, so Democrat or Republican, this is anybody who says, I believe government needs to be out of helping people make healthcare decisions. Right?
What are you hearing from folks you're talking to?
A lot of people don't understand. They're confused about what is legal in Arizona. So we're just trying to clear up the confusion and encourage them to vote no on this.
So the idea is it goes too far?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you think having this abortion measure on the ballot is going to potentially impact the top of the ticket?
I think it will draw more support for the Democratic ticket because, well, women especially, this is their issue, you know, and we now have a woman on the ticket at the top of the ticket, and I think that will draw more women to a woman candidate, but also men who think women's rights are an important thing.
Now, just to show how popular this issue is, Katie, take a look. They have this number here on the wall. This is the number, over 800,000 of signatures that they got to get this measure on the ballot, a grassroots effort here in the state. That is more than any other measure has ever gotten in Arizona state history, Katie.
Liz Kreutz. Liz, thank you very much. And coming up, what's behind the shift of